I'm Vanessa Grant, 28 years old, and for a long time I thought my life was on a steady path. I worked hard through nursing school, pulling late nights, juggling part-time jobs, and believing that the college fund my parents promised me would carry me through to a secure future. But everything turned upside down when I discovered the truth. They had drained my entire fund, $45,000, not for me, but to bail out my brother's failing restaurant. To them, his dream was always more promising, while mine was treated as if it barely mattered. The betrayal hit hard. I had trusted them completely, never imagining they would sacrifice my future to prop up his sinking business. What I got instead were crushing student loans, and a bitter realization I was never their priority. Still, I bit my tongue, swallowed the pain, and built a life of my own from scratch. But then came the breaking point. They had the audacity to call me not to apologize, but to beg for another $4,000 to cover his rent. That was it. I had enough. I sent exactly $1 through a payment app with the message, "Good luck next time." That single act was my line in the sand. No more handouts, no more excuses. What followed after that decision was even more shocking than I expected. This story of broken trust boundaries and finally standing my ground only gets wilder from here. Before I dive deeper into my story, tell me in the comments what time are you watching this and from which city. I'd love to see just how far my story has traveled. Growing up in Charlottesville, Virginia, our family seemed like any other. Our house was modest, 2 stories with a small backyard, the kind you'd see in any middle-class neighborhood. But beneath the surface there was an unspoken rule. My brother Owen was the star of the show. My dad Charles, a retail store manager, and my mom Elaine, a bank clerk, poured their energy into him. They called him their future star, always raving about his big dreams to open a restaurant. Meanwhile, my own passions barely registered on their radar. As a kid, I loved science, especially anything tied to medicine. I'd spend hours reading about human anatomy, dreaming of becoming a nurse. My teacher, Mrs. Helen Ward, noticed my spark. She'd pull me aside after class, saying, "You've got a gift for this, don't let it go." Her encouragement felt like a lifeline, but at home, it was a different story. When I showed Mom my science fair ribbon, she gave a quick smile and said, "That's nice, honey," before turning back to Owen's latest cooking experiment. He'd get top-of-the-line knives or a fancy mixer, while I got a stack of used textbooks from a thrift store. I remember one summer as a teenager when Owen signed up for an expensive culinary workshop in Richmond. Dad beamed, saying, this could be his big break. I asked if I could join a biology camp. Nothing fancy, just a local program. Mom sighed. We're stretched thin right now. I didn't push, but it stung. Owen's hobbies were an investment. Mine were an afterthought. I'd overhear them bragging to neighbors about his natural talent, while my report cards plastered with A's got a nod and a "keep it up." It wasn't just the money, it was the attention. Owen could spill sauce across the kitchen counter, and Dad would laugh it off, saying, that's just his creative process. But if I left a book out of place, Mom would snap, why can't you be more responsible? I started keeping my achievements quiet, tucking my science fair medals into a drawer. Mrs. Ward once asked why I didn't share my wins at home. I just shrugged. I didn't have the words to explain the sinking feeling of being invisible. One Christmas stands out. Owen, fresh off another cooking course, got a sleek chef's knife set, the kind professionals use. I unwrapped a dog-eared copy of a medical textbook, pages yellowed and spine cracked. Mom said, we thought you'd like it for your studies. I forced a smile, but inside I felt like an afterthought. Owen's gift came with a speech about how he'd make us proud one day. My book, just a practical choice, no fanfare. Looking back, I see how those moments shaped me. I worked harder, stayed late at the library, determined to prove I didn't need their spotlight. Mrs. Ward's words stuck with me. Your passion will carry you. But every time I heard Dad say Owen was destined for greatness, a knot tightened in my chest. I wasn't jealous, not exactly. I just wanted them to see me too. I kept hoping they'd notice my effort, my grades, my dreams. But Owen's shadow loomed large, and I was always a step behind in their eyes. By high school, I'd learned to lean on myself. I took extra shifts at a local diner to save for college while Owen got cash for new cooking gear. When I aced my biology exams, Mrs. Ward would high-five me, but at home, Mom would say, "That's great. But have you seen Owen's new recipe?" I'd nod, swallow the hurt, and keep going. I didn't know then that their favoritism was setting the stage for a much bigger betrayal, one that would change everything. When I was a teenager, my parents made a promise that gave me hope. One evening over dinner, Dad looked at me with a rare seriousness and said, "We're setting up a savings fund for you to buy a house or start a business one day." Mom nodded, adding, "It's for your future." Those words lit a spark in me. I imagined a small apartment of my own, or maybe a clinic where I could help people. I clung to that promise like a lifeline, believing it was my ticket to something bigger. But promises are only as good as the people keeping them. While I poured my energy into making that future real, my family's priorities were elsewhere. I took on summer jobs, waiting tables at a local cafe, babysitting neighbors' kids to chip in for household expenses. I skipped school trips to the coast, telling myself it was worth it to keep our family afloat. Meanwhile, Owen was sinking money into his latest obsession, a high-end espresso machine for his future restaurant. It cost $500, and Dad paid for it without blinking, saying, "This is an investment in his career." I bit my tongue, but the unfairness burned. Every time I brought up my savings fund, Mom would smile vaguely and say, "It's growing, don't worry." I trusted her. I didn't ask for details, didn't question why Owen's projects always came first. When he enrolled in a $1,000 restaurant management course, Mom justified it. "He needs this to succeed." I nodded, swallowing my questions. Why didn't they ask me before dipping into our family's budget? Why was his dream worth more than mine I kept sacrificing? One year, I wanted to join a pre-med workshop at a nearby college. Nothing extravagant, just a 2-week program to boost my nursing school applications. It cost $200. I pitched it to Dad, explaining how it could help my career. He frowned, checking his phone. "We just paid for Owen's new chef's uniform," he said. "Maybe next year." I didn't argue, but the rejection stung like a slap. I used my cafe tips to buy study guides instead, staying up late to teach myself what the workshop would have covered. Owen's spending never slowed. He'd come home with glossy brochures for culinary expos, talking about networking opportunities while Mom hung on his every word. I'd sit quietly, folding napkins, feeling like an outsider in my own home. Once I overheard Dad telling a friend Owen's going to put our name on the map. I wanted to scream. What about me? But I didn't. I kept working, kept saving, kept believing their promise about my fund. By my senior year of high school, I was juggling 2 part-time jobs, cafe shifts and tutoring kids in biology. I'd stash every dollar I could, thinking it would add to my savings fund. But Owen's latest venture, a pop-up food stall at a local festival, needed startup cash. Mom handed him $700 from our family account, saying, "This could be his big break." I asked her later if my fund was still safe. She patted my hand and said, "Of course it's there for you." I believed her even as a knot of doubt tightened in my gut. Looking back, I see how naive I was. I thought my sacrifices, missing out on trips, working late nights, skipping fun with friends, would earn me a place in their priorities. I thought my fund was untouchable, a reward for my hard work. But every time Owen got a new gadget or course, a piece of that trust chipped away. I didn't realize how deep their favoritism ran or how far they'd go to prop up his dreams at the expense of mine. I was just a teenager holding on to a promise that felt like my future. But that promise was already starting to crack. Starting at University of Virginia felt like my chance to shine. I'd worked so hard to get there, carrying dreams of becoming a nurse and proving I could stand on my own. Adjusting to college life was tough, but I threw myself into my nursing program determined to make every moment count. To cover expenses, I took a part-time job at a local hospital stocking supplies and assisting nurses. It was grueling, 30 hours a week on top of classes, but I told myself it was temporary. My savings fund, the one mom and dad had promised, would help me through. Halfway through my sophomore year, reality hit like a cold splash. I needed extra cash for textbooks and lab fees, so I called Mom to ask about dipping into my fund. Her voice hesitated, then she said, "It's not as much as it was. We had to cover some expenses." My stomach dropped. What expenses? I pressed. She mumbled something about Owen's restaurant hitting a rough patch. I hung up, heart racing, and checked the bank account they'd linked to my name. The balance was supposed to be around $25,000 by then. Instead, it showed just $12,000. Half my fund gone, siphoned off to pay debts for Owen's failing business. I confronted Dad over the phone that night. "How could you use my money without asking?" I demanded. He sighed, his tone flat. "We thought Owen's restaurant would turn around. It was a family decision I wasn't part of." I felt my trust crack, but I didn't push further. I couldn't afford to lose focus, not with exams looming. So I kept working, picking up extra shifts to cover my costs. The hospital job was relentless. I'd finish a 12-hour shift, then drag myself to lectures, barely staying awake. My classmates landed competitive internships at big clinics, but I couldn't apply. I was too exhausted, stretched thin between work and school. One professor noticed my fatigue and pulled me aside. "You're burning out," she said. "Why not cut back on hours?" I forced a smile. I don't have a choice. I didn't tell her about the fund or how my parents had prioritized Owen's pipe dream over my education. Meanwhile, Owen was still chasing his big break. I'd hear updates through family calls how he'd bought new tables for his restaurant, hired extra staff, even splurged on a flashy sign. Each detail twisted the knife. That was my money, my future being poured into his sinking venture. Mom would say, "He's so close to making it work." I wanted to scream, "What about me?" But I stayed silent, burying my frustration in textbooks and double shifts. By my junior year, I had to take out student loans, $15,000 to cover tuition and rent. The debt felt like a weight on my chest, but I had no other option. I called Mom one evening, hoping for reassurance about the remaining fund. "It's still there, right?" I asked. She paused too long. "We've had to use a bit more," she admitted. Owen needed help with a loan payment. I gripped the phone, my voice shaking. "How much is left?" She wouldn't answer directly, just said, "We're managing it." That vagueness was a warning, but I wasn't ready to face the full truth. I pushed through, acing my classes despite the exhaustion, but the missed opportunities piled up. A summer internship at a top hospital in Richmond came up perfect for my resume. It was unpaid, so I'd need to cut back on work to take it. I asked Dad if I could use some of my fund to cover living costs. His response was curt. "We don't have that kind of flexibility right now. Owen's business is at a critical point." I hung up, tears stinging my eyes. I skipped the internship, working extra hospital shifts instead. Looking back, those years taught me resilience, but they also planted seeds of doubt. I'd believed in my parents' promise, trusted they'd put me first at least once. Instead, they'd chipped away at my future to prop up Owen's. Each dollar they took from my fund was a choice to value his dreams over mine. I didn't know then how far they'd go, or how that betrayal would reshape everything I thought I knew about family. Graduation day was supposed to be my triumph. After 4 years of late nights, endless shifts at the hospital, and scraping by on student loans, I walked across the stage at University of Virginia with my nursing degree in hand. I'd done it against the odds, with no safety net. My plan was clear: use the rest of my savings fund to pay down my $15,000 student debt and start fresh. I called Mom a week before the ceremony, buzzing with excitement. "I need to access my fund now," I said. "It'll help clear my loans." Her silence on the line was the first warning. "We'll talk when you're home," she replied, her voice tight. When I got back to Charlottesville, I sat down with Dad and Mom in their car parked outside our old house. I didn't want to wait, I needed answers. How much is left in my fund? I asked, trying to keep my tone steady. Dad shifted in his seat, avoiding my eyes. Mom cleared her throat. There's nothing left, she said flatly. My heart stopped. Nothing, I echoed, my voice rising. You said there was still some after you used half for Owen's restaurant. Dad finally looked at me, his jaw tight. We had to use it all, $45,000, to keep his business afloat. It was a family decision. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the car. $45,000, every cent I'd been promised, every dollar I'd counted on, was gone. A family decision, I snapped. You didn't even ask me. Mom's face hardened. We thought Owen's restaurant would succeed, she said. It was for the family's future. I stared at her, waiting for an apology, a hint of regret. Instead, Dad chimed in. You're doing fine, aren't you? You've got your degree. Their words hit like a slap. They weren't sorry, they were justifying it. I gripped the car door handle, my knuckles white. That was my money, I said, my voice shaking. I worked for years, gave up everything believing in your promise. Mom rolled her eyes. Don't be dramatic, she said. Owen needed it more. His business was at stake. I couldn't believe it. They'd drained my future to prop up Owen's failing dream, and they didn't even see it as wrong. What about my future? I asked, tears burning my eyes. Dad shrugged. You'll figure it out. You always do. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. I'd spent years trusting their words, sacrificing my own wants to keep our family strong. Now, sitting in that cramped car, I saw the truth. I'd never been their priority. Owen's restaurant, his future star status, always came first. I wanted to scream, to demand they explain why his failure was worth more than my hard-earned success. But their blank faces told me everything. They didn't care enough to feel guilty. I stepped out of the car, slamming the door behind me. You should have told me, I said, my voice low but steady. Mom called after me. We did what we had to do. I didn't turn back. I walked away, my chest tight with anger and hurt. That conversation broke something in me, not just my trust, but the illusion that my family valued me. They'd made their choice, and it wasn't me. I didn't know how I'd move forward, but one thing was clear: I couldn't rely on them anymore. A few months after graduation, my mom called with a familiar request. I was settling into my first nursing job, working long shifts at a Charlottesville clinic, trying to rebuild after learning my savings fund was gone. Her voice was casual, almost cheerful. We need a little help, she said. Owen's behind on his rent, $4,000. Can you pitch in? I froze, gripping my phone. The audacity hit me like a wave. They'd already taken $45,000 of my future for Owen's failed restaurant, and now they were back asking for more. I didn't answer right away. My mind raced, replaying that car confrontation where they'd dismissed my loss as a family decision. I wasn't going to bend this time. I called my friend Nora Baxter, who'd always been my sounding board. They're unbelievable, I told her, pacing my tiny apartment. They drained my fund, and now they want me to bail Owen out again. Nora listened, then said firmly, You don't owe them anything. You've carried enough. Her words steadied me like a hand pulling me back from the edge. She was right. I'd spent years putting their needs above mine. I called Mom back the next day. I'm not giving you the money, I said, my voice calm but unyielding. She gasped, then launched into a lecture. Owen's in a tough spot, she said. You're doing well, can't you help your brother? I cut her off. You chose his dreams over mine. I'm done. She tried to argue, but I hung up, my hands shaking. I opened a payment app, sent Owen $1, and typed good luck next time. It was petty, sure, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of my power. Dad called later, his tone sharp. What's with the dollar, he demanded. You're being selfish? Selfish? After they'd emptied my fund without a word, I didn't argue, I just ended the call. Owen texted next, whining about how I was abandoning family. I didn't respond. Their words stung, but I was done letting them guilt me into submission. Nora's encouragement echoed in my mind. You're allowed to say no. For the first time, I believed it. I decided then to draw a line. I blocked Mom and Dad's numbers, then Owen's. It wasn't easy. Every beep of my phone made me second-guess myself. What if they really needed me? But I remembered Nora's words and the weight of their betrayal. They'd made their choices and I had to make mine. I wasn't cutting them off to punish them. I was protecting myself. I couldn't keep pouring from an empty cup. I kept in touch with my Uncle Philip, who'd always been kind, but stayed out of family drama. He didn't push me to reconcile, just listened when I needed to vent. I also leaned on my friend Nathan, a coworker at the clinic who'd faced his own family struggles. You're doing the right thing, he told me over coffee one night. Sometimes family means boundaries, not blind loyalty. His support alongside Nora's gave me the strength to stand firm. Days turned into weeks, and the silence from my family was both heavy and liberating. I'd check my phone, half expecting a desperate message, but nothing came. I focused on my job, saving every penny to chip away at my student loans. The $1 gesture wasn't just a jab, it was my declaration of independence. I wasn't their backup plan anymore. I'd given enough, sacrificed enough, and I deserved to put myself first. Life moved on, but updates about my family came through others. I'd cut contact with Mom, Dad, and Owen, focusing instead on my nursing career in Charlottesville. Still, word trickled in, mostly from Nora, who'd hear gossip through mutual acquaintances. She called one evening, her voice matter of fact. Owen's restaurant went under, she said. He sold it for pennies on the dollar and moved back in with your parents. I nodded, unsurprised. His dream, the one they'd poured $45,000 of my savings into, had crumbled. Part of me felt a grim satisfaction, but mostly I just felt numb. Nora went on explaining how Owen had ignored warnings from suppliers, racking up debts he couldn't pay. The sale barely covered half his loans, leaving him with nothing but a rented truck to haul his belongings back to our old family house. I didn't ask for details, I didn't need them. The future star they'd bet everything on had crashed, and I wasn't there to pick up the pieces. Dad and Mom weren't faring much better. Nora mentioned they'd sold their second car, a beat-up sedan, to cover credit card bills tied to Owen's business. Dad, who'd always prided himself on managing the family's finances, started picking up extra shifts at the store. Mom, too, was working overtime at the bank, her weekends swallowed by paperwork. They were drowning in debt, scrambling to keep their heads above water. I listened, my jaw tight. They'd gambled my future on Owen's dream, and now they were paying the price. Meanwhile, I was building a life of my own. At the clinic, I'd caught the attention of Dr. Barbara Hill, my mentor. She was tough but fair, always pushing me to take on more responsibility. You've got the instincts for this, she'd say during our rounds, her eyes sharp but kind. Her faith in me was a lifeline, pulling me forward when doubts crept in. I took extra training courses, aiming for a promotion to lead nurse. My student loans still loomed, but I chipped away at them, paycheck by paycheck, refusing to let debt define me. Nora's updates didn't stir any urge to reach out. I'd spent years carrying their burdens, sacrificing trips, working double shifts, trusting their promises. Now, hearing about their struggles, I felt detached, like I was reading about strangers. Owen's failure wasn't my fault, and neither was their financial mess. Dr. Hill noticed my focus one day and asked, "You seem lighter lately, what's changed?" I smiled faintly. "I stopped trying to fix other people's mistakes," I said. She nodded as if she understood more than I'd shared. I threw myself into my work, taking pride in every patient I helped, every chart I perfected. My apartment's small, but mine became a sanctuary. I'd cook simple meals, read nursing journals, and save for a future I controlled. Dr. Hill pushed me to apply for a leadership program at a regional hospital, a step toward a better salary and more impact. "You're ready," she told me, handing me the application. I filled it out that night, my hands steady with purpose. Nora called again, a few months later, her tone clipped. "Your parents are barely making ends meet," she said. Owen's not working, just sits at home complaining. I thanked her for the update but didn't linger on the call. Their choices had led them here, and I wasn't responsible for pulling them out. Dr. Hill's words echoed in my mind. Your energy is precious. Spend it on what matters. For me, that meant my patience, my career, my peace. Looking back, I saw how their collapse mirrored their priorities. They'd banked everything on Owen, ignoring the cost to me. Now, with his restaurant gone and their savings drained, they were left with nothing but regrets they'd never voice. I didn't gloat, I didn't need to. My life was proof enough that I could thrive without them. I was building something real, something mine, and no one could take that away. A year after cutting contact, I found my own strength. My life in Charlottesville was steady, working as a nurse, paying down my loans, building a future I controlled. I'd heard through the grapevine that my family was still struggling, but I made a choice. Their problems were no longer mine. When a distant cousin mentioned Mom asking if I'd help with their bills, I shut it down. I'm not their bank, I said firmly. I'd given enough years of sacrifices, trust, and hope, and I wasn't going back. Owen, I learned, was still living with Mom and Dad with no job and no plans. His restaurant dreams had evaporated, leaving him dependent, stuck in the same house he'd once bragged about leaving behind. Mom and Dad were scraping by, cutting corners to cover their debts. They'd traded their vacations for extra shifts, their fridge stocked with the cheapest groceries. Their belief in Owen as the future star had led them to financial strain, and now they were living the consequences of their choices. I didn't dwell on their downfall. My focus was on my own path. Every shift at the clinic, every patient I comforted reminded me of my worth. I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. I was a nurse, a professional, someone who'd fought for her place. Their favoritism had hurt me deeply, but it also taught me a hard truth. Self-respect matters more than one-sided family loyalty. Setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was survival. Their preference for Owen had left scars, but it also showed me how to value myself. Looking back, I see the cost of their choices. They bet on the wrong person, ignoring the one who'd worked tirelessly to build a future. Their actions taught me that family doesn't mean obligation, it means mutual respect. I learned to protect my peace, to say no without guilt. My story isn't just about loss, it's about finding strength in letting go. I'm not defined by their mistakes, but by the life I've created despite them. Thank you for listening to my story. Your support means everything. Have you ever set boundaries with family? Share below and subscribe for more.